Get started. So welcome everyone to the Spring 2025 Autism Training Series sponsored by Aetna Better Health of Kentucky in partnership with the Kentucky Autism Training Center. My name is Andrea Polk and I am the Children's System of Care Administrator with Aetna Better Health of Kentucky. This is the second training in our spring series and we appreciate your attendance. Did want to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started for today. If you can please remain on mute and place any questions or comments in the chat. We will ensure those get answered. They will either be answered in the chat by people from KATC, or our presenter will stop from time to time and see if she has time to answer any of the questions in the chat box. Otherwise, at the very end of this training, because it is being recorded, the recording will be stopped and people can have a chance to come off mute and actually ask questions if they want to. There will be a resource folder link placed in the chat box as well. It will have today's slides in it, as well as other resources for you all to utilize. It is important that if you need a CEU or a training certificate of any kind, that you must complete the survey. This survey link will be placed in the chat at the very end of the training. CEUs are still pending for some licensures, so most of the time, those certificates aren't going to be sent out until the training series is over. If you are a foster parent or DCBS worker, we also need you to complete that survey so that you can get training credit. Now, I would like to introduce our presenter for today. We have Katie Wolf-Whaley from UAK Human Developmental Institute, who will be training on supported employment.
Hello. Thank you for having me today. It's good to see you all and happy to be here. So I am here to talk about employment and this bigger idea of employment first and what it means for folks with disabilities in Kentucky and for those who support them in different parts of their life. And so I think you all support people in lots of different ways. And so how do you fit into this idea? So I do work for the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. It is Kentucky's University Center on Disability. And I work on several projects around disability employment. And then I also am honored to serve as the chair of the Kentucky Employment First Council. So I talk about this because of this big idea, right? So I think you all work with young people who are getting ready to launch into adulthood, and this question is huge in our society and with people, right? The first thing we do when we get to know somebody is to ask, "What's your name?" And then the next question we usually ask is, "What do you do?" And how one is able to answer this question is really powerful. It makes an impression on others. It kind of gives us a place in who we are and where we fit and whether people want to continue that conversation with us or not. And, whether we admit it or not, it's those judgments and those thoughts that other people have around us and the confidence we have in answering this question. And so a lot of what we do in this work is helping people have a way to answer this question that is so powerful in our society. Yet we know that oftentimes these are more of the ideas that other people in our society have around adults with disabilities and employment, right? Those stereotypical jobs. If we think of disability and employment, everybody can probably rattle off a few different jobs that we think those people tend to do, right? Oh, my Kroger hires lots of those people to bag groceries. I still get this question sometimes. Oh, that's interesting. So what kind of jobs do those people do? As if there's just a limited number of things given the entire range of people with disabilities that exist. Or my cousin goes to one of those places, but he has the mind of a 7-year-old, so I don't think he could ever work. Just those prevalent ideas out there of what we mean by disability and what people even have the potential of doing versus those old ways of thinking about folks, or even people themselves who aren't sure what they could do, or, well, I can't work or I'll lose all my benefits, right? Maybe having never talked to anybody about this, but that idea is out there that if I go to work, I'm going to lose my healthcare, my everything. And so how do we get past those kinds of ideas? And why does it matter, right? It matters because it makes it, when we have these barriers in our heads, even those of us that support other people of, well, someone can't work or they'll lose their benefits, or I'm not really sure what they could do anyway. And there's these other places they can go where they're safe. It makes it really easy to settle for segregate settings. That there's that other place where adults with disabilities go after high school, where we know that they're safe and they have something to do and have some other people to be with, or to just settle for those entry level, low skilled jobs because they're always hiring. And we know at least people have found something, right? A few hours a week, they have this to do. Or we help people find jobs and they stay poor on purpose because we don't know the reality of the benefit situation. And so we say, well, but if you just work a few hours, then that's fine. It's not going to mess with anything. And we don't want to do any of these kind of things on purpose, right? And so we need to know better. So if we look at employment numbers that are here across Kentucky, these are numbers through the Center for the CMHC Mental Health Centers. IPS is individualized placement and support. It's a type of supported employment service. And so their data through the CMHCs shows 66% of adults who receive services through our community mental health centers say they want to go to work, but only 20% of those with serious mental illness are actually employed. That's a big gap, right? If we look at our education youth 1 year out survey, so there's a project that surveys students who have exited school 1 year who had an IEP. We know that almost 30% of students who had IEPs 1 year after leaving high school are not pursuing higher education or employment, either one. If we look at students with IEPs, those students who had the most significant disabilities, how that's captured with education data, 63% of students are not pursuing higher education or employment, right? And we think about, what do kids usually do after high school? They go to college or they go to work, right? When we look at those students with IEPs, it's not the same kind of rate as other students. And then if we look at our adult intellectual disability system, intellectual developmental disability system, we have these numbers. Only 11% of adults who are receiving publicly funded services in our state IDD systems have a job in the community. 11% of adults. Now, when they're surveyed, almost half of those who are unemployed say they want to go to work. Of those people who are unemployed and say they want to go to work, only 16% of them have employment written down in their service plan. So those are people who are unemployed that say they want to go to work. Only 16% even have it written down in their plan, let alone are actually actively being supported to look for a job and get connected to services. We know that in the grand scheme of how our dollars are spent for day services for folks in our IDD system, only 8% of total funding for this blanket group of dollars called day and employment services goes to integrated employment services. So that's a lot of dollars supporting adults to spend their days in things other than work. And so employment first has come about, right? To think about why there's such big gaps in these numbers. And so it started as a philosophy, this idea among people that we know people can do more. We know folks who experience disability have competencies and things to offer and want to get out and be a part of their communities and to use their value in different ways. And then it became a movement. So you had more people fighting for this idea of, how can we get people better connected to employment supports? How can we get the rest of our disability service system to pay attention to the fact that we have way more people saying they want to go to work than we do people receiving those kind of supports, even though they're available, they're just not getting those connections. So we had the belief, we had people taking action and demanding these kind of things, and then finally it started to become a policy direction and even a law that employment be that preferred option, that priority option for people who say they want to go to work. So in 2014, the Work Innovation Opportunity Act was reauthorized, and it included some new things around disability and employment. And one of them was this clear intention and connection between youth with disabilities being connected to employment supports and services. With this strong statement that Congress makes clear that youth with significant disabilities must be given every opportunity to receive the services necessary to ensure the maximum potential to achieve competitive integrated employment. And it also delineated that there needs to be better connection between all of our different service systems in order to have that happen, right? Not just say, oh, you're in school, good luck with that when you leave. That doesn't lead to better outcomes for people. We see the numbers. We know that hasn't done anything. So how can we make sure there's better partnerships and communication between education and these other parts of the adult service system so that students have access to the supports and services they need to become employed? But it really set that priority at the federal level. And then state after state has been setting it at the state level as well. And so in 2018, Kentucky had an executive order signed around employment first. And then in 2022, it was passed through our state legislature and signed into law. And so the priority statement in our Kentucky Employment First law reads that the General Assembly finds and declares that it is the policy of the Commonwealth of Kentucky that competitive integrated employment in the community shall be considered the first and primary option for persons with disabilities of working age who desire to become employed. Doesn't force anybody to go to work, doesn't force any business to hire anybody they wouldn't consider hiring otherwise. It just says that if somebody with a disability wants to go to work, employment should be that first and primary option that they're connected with for supports and services. And it talks about competitive integrated employment. And so as you enter this world of employment supports and adults these days, you'll see that definition a lot. And so this is generally what that definition means. This is how it's defined in our state employment first law. And it's based upon the federal definitions in law and regulation. And that it means that people are paid no less than minimum wage and no less than others without disabilities who do similar work. That folks are eligible for benefits and promotions as employees who do similar work that don't experience disability. And that people with disabilities, employees, have the opportunity for interaction with non-disabled coworkers to the same extent as employees who do similar work that don't experience disability. It's an actual definition to say that it means a typical job out in the community that other people could apply for and get. It's not a special job where people are hired because they have a disability. They don't come into a business in a different way. And it's not a business that was created just to hire people with disabilities. It means we want people to have access to real jobs for fair wages that are out there across our Commonwealth. Part of that is because we know that we've called other things work and we've created these other systems for adults with disabilities and places for them to go for so long that we created an actual definition as to what a typical job is as opposed to other service related things. And part of it is we have a lot of businesses that need employees. And so we want to be able to help people to fill those labor needs. So if you look at overall employment data in our state, we have about 78% of Kentuckians without disabilities who are employed, as opposed to about 38% of Kentuckians with disabilities who are employed. That's a 40% gap in that employment rate. We also know, and this is a US Chamber of Commerce number, that Kentucky has just 70 available workers for every 100 open jobs. So when we think to the statistics earlier, we have a lot of adults receiving public services who say they want to go to work and are not receiving access to those supports and services that could help them become employed. And we know that there are a lot of businesses who need employees, and we don't have enough people actively looking for work to fill the jobs that are out there. And so it makes sense to connect these two and help people who want to go to work to have the services and supports that they need to be able to become successfully employed and to set those expectations for people in our society. And we know from other studies that businesses that do hire people with disabilities, and there's more numbers and there's more information around these data points, but it has a positive net income on businesses for lots of different reasons. It's not just the really sweet, nice thing to do, but it positively impacts businesses to diversify their workforce and to really look at these different talent pipelines that are out there and include looking at people with disabilities as part of that. And so we've started to see that more here in Kentucky as well. So these are a couple different examples. The State Chamber of Commerce has really looked at businesses are struggling to find good employees, that people aren't just showing up and applying for work the way they used to. And company after company is saying, I have to look at my workforce in different ways. How can I do that? And so they have stepped into this role of trying to help businesses to do so and realize Kentuckians with Disabilities is a place where you can find talented people and folks to fill these needs that you have. And so they've held now, to Inclusive Workforce Summit, which has been a statewide event focusing on helping businesses successfully recruit and retain employees with disabilities. And then they held their first Disability Hiring Academy earlier this year, which was a smaller group with lots of different sessions over the course of 3 days to dive into what it means to recruit and retain successful employees who experience disability and what that looks like and how you can do so within your own company. So when we talk about employment, business seems like an obvious place to start because, of course, if we want people to go to work, then we need employers to understand this. But it also really impacts all of our system, right? So who are you and where do you fit into this system of people with disabilities? Is it someone in your life that you know and that you love and that you care about in a personal way, in a professional capacity, other types of formal and informal connections that you have? So you might fit in different parts of this graphic. I think you're probably here because you fit into this disability service provider realm in some way. So what does it mean for you and the people that you know, right? To think about how employment first impacts that provision of goal setting and service delivery. What do people want? What do young people want in their life when they finish school and they're moving on? And if they want to go to work and they want to have good things in their, like, if someone wants their own apartment, one way to do that is to be able to afford rent, right? And so thinking about work to do that. How many people do we know? They want an apartment, they want a car, they want those kind of things. All right, well, most people in our society afford that because they go to work. And yes, there are public benefits that are out there, but we also know they don't pay as much as a job. And so how do we get people to be able to afford and access what it is they want in life? And realizing that this is true for everyone. Part of why the numbers have historically been so low for people with disabilities is we've let folks opt out of work, right? There's a lot of this idea around choice and, well, do you want to go to work or not? Well, I have 2 daughters who are young adults, and of course I want them to be happy and have good lives, but they're going to work because they need to be able to afford things, right? So what kind of work do you want to do? That's another question, but that's an expectation that as a parent I have had and other people in their life have had. Because the question isn't whether a person can work, but where and what's that going to look like. So these are all Kentuckians who are considered in our service system people who have a significant impact of disability, and they are employed from one end of our Commonwealth to the other, doing a variety of jobs, right? So if we think about what kind of jobs can those people do, this isn't what usually comes up on the list. These are all jobs that make sense for those people because someone took the time to figure out who they are and what they have to offer and make those connections in their local community. And we, as people who know folks who experience disability, even if you aren't the one who's helping someone find a job, it's that idea of having that high expectation that employment is possible for you. Because my guess is if you know people who receive all these types of services, it's possible someone in their life has not presumed that employment is a viable option. Well, we know some people in our caseload or some people in our classrooms might go to work, but I don't know about some of these other kids, right? Employment is a viable option for everybody. It's not a matter of whether someone can work, but where they can work and how that's going to work out for them. But that doesn't just happen for anyone, right? Yes, we have good laws, federal laws, state laws, but we also know that laws aren't what make good things happen for people. It's those of you who are actually there helping support people in the real world every day, who get to know young adults and figure out what life can look like for them and how you can help make them have the connections to make that happen. And especially as we think about this idea of transition and people going from school into the adult world, it for everybody it's a lot, right? Whether someone experiences disability or not, this idea of launching into adulthood is huge and it's complicated. And there's a lot to think about. And so for the people that you support, these are all these things that are going on, right? And then probably about 150 other squares that might not be on this slide. But are people looking at going straight into work? Do they want to go to college? Or there's some other type of vocational training or other type of post-secondary education that they're interested in receiving? Yes, all of those issues around benefits and right, just even being aware of basic things like just because you've received SSI doesn't mean once you turn 18 you're going to keep getting SSI because at age 18 redetermination is a true thing and lots of people lose that benefit and they don't realize that that's coming, let alone what happens if you do still have other benefits. And just looking at financial stability and what that means for people. I'll guardianship and if someone's their own guardian, do they have a guardian? How can they receive supports in making good decisions as they launch into adulthood? And so there's lots of different roles other people can play and what that can look like and how we can help set people up for success in making those good decisions. Other types of formal supports that they might get, right? Medicaid waivers, independent living services, transportation, housing, um, just helping people realize that life after high school, the adult service system is really different than the youth service system, right? There's a lot of things students are entitled to, and that the education system is required to provide. And it just doesn't work that way when students leave school and enter the adult world. And so people have to know what to apply for and how to apply and where to go to apply in order to be deemed eligible to receive access to those adult services. Because nobody just shows up at a meeting and tells you what to do, as if they're lucky, happens when they're younger, right? Now, that's a lot of information, and I don't have time to go into all of those, but you have access to a resource folder that includes these slides, but also includes a lot of links to resources that touch on the different components in these boxes as well. One thing that is standard while youth are still in high school, right, is that came about from that WIOA law that I referenced earlier, is this idea of pre-employment transition services. And you might hear them referred to as pre-ETS. That's how people usually call them. And they should be available to all students, youth with disabilities, who would otherwise be presumed eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. So certainly those with IEPs and 504 plans, so that they have access to the things on this slide to help them be thinking about employment and what comes after high school, to have that job exploration counseling, right? What kind of jobs are out there in your community and what interests you and what do employers need and what does it look like in the landscape where you want to live when you finish high school? Those work-based learning experience. So it might be in school or after school. It could be job shadowing, it could be a part-time job, it could be an internship or something that people realize what it really means to work in this field. Talk to people who are in that type of industry or business and what's it take to have a full-time work schedule and to get to work on time and what Work is really different than school, and a lot of people can benefit from those kind of things of understanding what it means to be employed. Work-based readiness training, right? Those hard skills that employers are looking for, but then also what we call soft skills and how we think about work and communicating with others and being ready to show up every day for work on time and those kind of things. Post-secondary counseling. What kind of education opportunities are out there, whether it's college or an associate's degree, like a 4-year college, 2-year associate's degree, VOTEC skills, whatever types of things people might need to further their education to get the kind of job that they want or to learn more about that area. And then self-advocacy. How can we help students understand how to stick up for themselves, how to advocate for themselves? What are their rights and responsibilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what they can say and what they can ask for to be able to be successful in the workplace and understand what that really means is important. So these are services that students should be receiving who have an identified disability while they're in high school. Again, the intent the intention of the law and the reality of it across our state sometimes differs, and it really depends where people are, what school they're in, and what other types of services are around. So it might look different in different parts of the state. These are some of the ways that people can receive pre-ETS services, different groups and organizations that offer it in different school systems across Kentucky. It might be during the school day for some students, and for those who are on track for a typical high school diploma, it's hard to fit these kind of things in during the school day. So it might happen outside of school hours, evenings, weekends, summer break, spring break, those kind of times. So you have some examples of summer programs that exist as well, that students might access more of that over the course of a week or a summer program in their area. The important thing is to think about who you are and what you do with people, and how do you fit, right? How can you help connect students to get the kind of things that they need? So if you know students who are in high school now, are they receiving pre-ETS? Are they connected to someone who's helping them learn about work opportunities in these different things? And if they aren't, who can you ask within their school system? The director of special ed, a counselor, a teacher, somebody to say, how does somebody get these, and can she get them as well? So to connect not just to those pre-ETS services, but from pre-vocational services to actual help getting a job. It's just a lot easier to talk about the idea of work and what comes next than it is to actually think about what you're good at and make connections with employers and get that job. And so making sure people go from those pre-employment services to actual transition services and vocational services, because it takes intention. For pre-ETS, there's a question in the chat: does the disability have to be identified by a 504 plan or IEP? The law is written that people are, if they are presumed eligible for VR services, so experience disability in some way. Typically, that happens because it's been written down and identified by either a 504 or IEP. I am not positive that that is required, but it would have to be identified in some way within the school system for the student, for them to know about this student, and that they would otherwise be presumed eligible for VR services and then qualify for pre-employment transition services. So the more you all know across your various areas of expertise and service delivery, the more you know, the more likely you are to be able to help connect people to those other services that can help them. And so one thing that's common is there's folks who have what we call 1915C Medicaid waivers. There's another question in the chat: if they have an IEP, does the school typically help with transition services before they graduate? I would love for the answer to that question to just be a resounding yes. The reality is it probably depends upon the school and who in the school is paying attention to that student. And I don't mean this to be rude, but really, who in the school knows that student and knows what they want and is being that proactive and has the bandwidth to be that proactive and to make the connections to local resources and offices that could help them as they transition into adulthood. So, yes, but sometimes I think that's a message to the student and their family of, hey, I'm going to refer you to the VR office, the vocational rehabilitation office. So you're going to need to get in touch with them and apply for service. Okay. And sometimes they do and they follow through. And sometimes they don't know what that means. And sometimes, oh my gosh, life as you're getting ready to finish high school and go into what comes next is so overwhelming and huge that that one suggestion just might get lost in the shuffle. And so, what that help looks like in getting to transition services differs from person to person and school to school. And what one person says and what another person hears as to whether the reality of that connection is made, which is why I think it's so helpful for more people to understand this process and the need for connections, because maybe the teacher says it and the mom misses it, but maybe you come in and say it and a physical therapist says it and an OT or a case manager, and now because it's being reminded and talked about in different ways, somebody gets the actual phone number and the way to make the connection to the office that it actually happens. If somebody has one of these 1915C waivers, Michelle P. or MPW, supports for community living, often referred to as SCL, or an acquired brain injury waiver. They include a lot of different services, and one of the services those waivers provide is supported employment. So they have access to funding for employment supports if they have one of these waivers. When we're talking about young people, I think the Michelle P waiver is more likely to be what somebody has.
All you want of that's gonna be rotten nasty.
I think that was a question for me. Um, the primary starting place in Kentucky for services for folks who experience disability that want to go to work is the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. That is their charge, is to help Kentuckians who experience disability obtain and maintain employment. So this is, and you have this infographic on the right side of the screen in your resource packet as well on that page, that you can that you can help share with families and with schools. The QR code takes you straight to the page where you can identify which VR office is local to you. You just put in your zip code so you can call and make that appointment. And just explain a bit about how it works and who can help connect students to these vocational services. And so someone made a comment in the chat that in many districts, those with more significant disabilities tend to get more help than those with a lesser impact of disability. And that could be because for so often it's the students with the most significant disability that get left behind and that we don't think about employment for. And so there are some more formal services like Community Work Transition Program, which is intended for those students with the more significant impact of disability. And sometimes maybe we think the students with a lesser impact know what to do or it's easier for them. And so being intentional to make sure everybody gets connected to the services and supports they need is really important. So that's a good point. Thanks. Yes, students can apply for VR services before they leave high school to make sure they are connected and have access to that once they finish. Starting earlier is always a good idea. So one of the things I wanted to talk about and was asked to talk about in this webinar specifically is supported employment, which is, to point to your question, a service intended for people with a more significant impact of disability. It's just one of the services that vocational rehabilitation provides. And it is designed to promote personalized employment opportunities for people, right? Go back to that definition of competitive integrated employment. It's not just, oh, well, there's this place where those people can get a job. It's those individualized employment services and opportunities that really discovers those personal interests and contributions. Who is this person and what do they have to offer? To help get help in finding and negotiating a job that fits what people like to do and do well and what employers need in that local area. and then to become established as value employees and pursue job advancements. So these are the ways the service system works. And so you see those first bubbles of discovery, getting to know somebody, job development, getting connected and applying for work, and those on the job services. Those are all under that OVR services bubble. So that's the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation that I mentioned. Not only are they the primary state agency for disability employment, but they're the first funder of service in our state. So if somebody has a 1915C waiver or access to other types of services, usually that will cover what we call extended services, because VR will cover those upfront services first, which
Like a
is
health.
why it's important for people to become what they call a consumer, to apply for services with vocational rehabilitation, go through that eligibility process and get connected with someone that can help them. So because, as I understand it, those of you on this webinar don't live within that vocational rehabilitation world, this is how these are who the players are and how it works within that service. So you understand the language and can help talk about these kind of things with the folks that you know and people who do receive services from you. So the VR counselor, a vocational rehabilitation counselor, is that main person within VR who they will meet with and who will determine what somebody needs to become successful on the job. And there's a wide range of services that VR offers. Supported employment is just one of those services. So they might receive services within vocational rehabilitation. They could make a referral to a rehabilitation technologist. So maybe somebody goes to VR because they want to go to college, and what they're going to need is some, like, a smart pen and some help with technology to make sure that they get the information and get the notes that they need so they can study in ways that make sense for them to get through college. That would happen within vocational rehabilitation. Or in the case of supported employment, that counselor would connect them to what's called a CRP, a community rehabilitation program. It's another private agency for that direct employment service. So you have the VR counselor within the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, and then you'd have what I'd refer to as an employment specialist. Maybe you've heard the term job coach, who would work for that agency to provide the direct service of supported employment. These are all services that are authorized through federal law. And so I don't know, to answer the question in the chat, that there's anything new that will, I am not aware that any of that will affect this. These are services authorized through federal law that come through to every state. So that employment specialist, that employment service agency, they can bill VR when someone is a consumer there for those initial services. And then they'll have other sources of funding for these extended services that we'll talk about. So that might, then they might bill Voc Rehab and then bill that Medicaid waiver. Or if it's one of the community mental health centers, maybe it would be CDBG dollars or something like that. They'll have different ways of funding that. So it depends upon what that agency has access to, what that person has access to. Funding wise, it doesn't work exactly the same for everybody. It helps keeps us on our toes. And just a reminder that other involvement may include, right, that rehabilitation technology, assistive technology through vocational rehabilitation, or access and just partnering with physical therapy, occupational therapy, behavior supports, whatever else is involved in that person's life, to get a good picture of who this individual is and what it takes for them to be successful on the job, and to really think about working as a team. In transportation, we could have a 4-hour seminar in transportation, right? And how we find good transportation for people, but thinking about how folks get connected and how they're going to get to work. And so this slide is an overview of what that employment specialist should be doing. So if you are working with someone in another capacity and you hear they have one of these people in their life, ask questions about this, right? So how did they get to know you and figure out what kind of work to look for? Because they shouldn't just come in and say, well, I know people who are hiring at Lowe's and Home Depot and McDonald's. Which one of those do you want? to you as another person who cares about this individual, that should be a red flag. Well, they should probably be finding out what you want to do and then think about where they would go and look for work, right? We start with the person before we start with the employer. So the more you know about how it works, the more you can help that person advocate for themselves or insert yourself in the process and share that kind of knowledge with that employment specialist. So they should get to know who that person is, what they're good at, what good work could look like for them, and what's it going to take for them to be successful. And then help that person learn about different jobs in their local community and talk to employers or other people. They can help you apply for the job and help practice interviewing and those types of things as well. Then they should help make sure that you can learn the job, right? That orientation and onboarding happens in a way that makes sense for you, whether that's physically or cognitively, how information is shared. Maybe they have written training orientation manuals, and you know that reading is not this person's strong suit. And so that employment specialist is going to give that information verbally as well, or ask for, do you happen to have videos? And is there a way that someone could model what the work looks like? Because they learn best through watching somebody do it, right? To make sure that that happens in a way that makes sense for that person. To make sure that they learn how to do their job and are able to do their job. It's not the employment specialist's job to do it for them, right? This isn't two for the price of one or anything like that. It's helping make sure that people receive support if and as needed to learn to do that job on their own. It's not hiring someone with a disability just for the sake of hiring someone with a disability. It's figuring out who this person is, what the employer needs, making sure that people apply for the kind of jobs that will be a good fit for them, right? It should be based on merit. This is a typical job and they are competing with other people for that job, but that we're there as extra support for, yes, they can do this job if this types of adaptations are made or these accommodations are in place and this type of additional support is provided and I can help to do that, right? It's not asking for special favors or anything like that. We want people to be valued for the work that they do. This is paid work that they are getting. But thinking back from the beginning of who this person is and what good work could look like and what's this person interested in? What are they good at, right? What are their strengths? What are those skill set? And then what are those conditions for success? What's it going to take for someone to be successful? What kind of lighting and pace and culture and supervisory style and just the vibe of the business and the right, typical relationships with coworkers, how much typical support is there? Do people work really independently? Different people want and need different things in work, and we want to make sure that we are suggesting places of employment that are going to fit this person as much as possible, and then we add additional supports to help them be successful when that's needed. But once we know all of this kind of stuff about somebody, that's what dictates the job search, right? So again, that's what I mean by we don't say, well, here's 4 businesses I have really good relationships with. Which one do you want? It's who is this person and what's it going to take for them to be successful? Then we identify businesses that have need of what this person has to offer and that have the kind of culture where they could be successful, or how do we think we can adapt that in ways that are going to be okay for that person and the business. And so they should be helping them in what we Service Land calls job development, what other people call networking and making connections, right? So identifying places of business. This is these are different ways that you all can come in. One, if we go back to what are they good at and what's it going to take for them to be successful, if you have known people for years, if you have been providing other types of services and supports or known them in different parts of their life, share that information. It's okay to insert yourself and say, hey, if you want me to come to one of the meetings or talk to your employment specialist, I'd be happy to do so, right? That's being a partner in this process and sharing information. That employment specialist might be really good at what they do and might be an amazing person, but they don't know everything about this person and they only have so long to learn. So the more good and relevant information with the job seeker's approval, of course, you are able to share. How do they move? What have you learned in occupational therapy that can be helpful for them, right? Those types of things can help build this body of knowledge about who this person is and what it takes for them to be successful. And then who do you know? What connections do you have, right? Networking is big for any of us. If we were looking for work, we would think about who do we know and who do they know that can help us make a connection and get an in a place. In general in our lives, right? It's not just what you know, it's who you know. That's how people get jobs. And so how can you help be part of that networking process as well? So share those knowledge and contacts that you have. So this is just a couple of examples of what we know about somebody and how that directs with where we're going and looking for work. So Lucy was an example of a woman, a young woman who came out of high school. She's autistic, but she likes to be around children. That was the one thing she'd say. So then there was a whole lot of other learning about what's it going to take for Lucy to be successful. And I mean, lots of people like children, but that doesn't mean they want to work with them all the time, right? Like I love my children more than life itself. That doesn't mean I want to be surrounded by young people every day, all day. But she likes to help people, right? She preferred the younger children because they needed more help. And she likes to be, she's a helper at heart, right? She wants to be a doer in that way. So all of these kind of things were learned about Lucy. And then they thought, okay, where do people get paid to be around children and to be able to help in this way? She wants to be busy. She likes there being a lot going on all the time. Now, this might not sound like every autistic person you know, right? That's the importance of knowing Lucy and who she is as an individual and how her disability might impact her. And then thinking, all right, I think a childcare center could be good. Here's one I know of where you don't have to have your child development associate's degree in order to get hired. They do have these other accreditations. It's a good place to, right? It's a high quality center. They pay attention to these kind of things. And so that was one of the reasons this center was looked at for making connections and introducing them to Lucy and learning more about the business. And then realizing that the employment specialist could give some heads up on how Lucy best learns, right? And telling Lucy it's okay to say, please slow down when people give instructions or explain the lesson plan that day. And the employment specialist was able to hear from her coworkers how things were going and then meet with her offsite as well about areas where she was struggling. Because it's a new job and it's a lot. And so they could meet offsite to say, like one of the things was you don't just want to tell a kid no all the time, right? We want to redirect to other opportunities and other activities. And so practicing that offsite was something that the employment specialist was able to do with Lucy. And then Jake was someone who, through a lot of learning, somebody finally said, well, Jake, have you told her about your car out back in one of the barns? And once the employment specialist learned about this car he liked to tinker on, a whole new world of communication happened. How do you get to know Jake and really find out what he's interested in? And it took talking to other people to get some ideas of how to engage in conversation with him. And then thinking about, all right, he really likes to be around cars. He likes to talk about cars, but he's not a skilled mechanic right now. He doesn't have that level of skill set. So where are people employed, where there's a wide range of job tasks that need to be done that Jake could do, that we could build upon. And so he ended up getting a job at one of the local car dealerships. It was a big dealership. He could start with a few tasks because it took Jake longer to learn new tasks than other people. And the employment specialist could help with that. Reading wasn't a strong suit. And so they used picture cues to mark what tasks needed to be done, what the steps were. And he worked part-time and started with just a couple tasks. Well, after about a month, it didn't take him 20 hours a week to do those tasks anymore. But because there's a lot to do at the car dealership, they were able to add tasks over time to fit his schedule and make sure that he had enough to do during those 20 hours. And a car dealership was a place where that made sense because of the variety of things that needed to happen. Whereas there might not have been as wide a variety of tasks at a small mechanic shop, right? More intense car stuff, but less opportunity. And so that's the kind of thought process that can go into the work. And then they can help people prepare for interviews, right? What's it take to get a job? Now that we've identified a place that might be good for you. And again, this is where you come in. What do you do with people where you can help with these interview skills and prepare people for looking for a job? If we just think at the most basic level of getting a job, a handshake and eye contact go a long way. Those things are not easy for everybody or typical or comfortable for everybody. Is that something that you can help with, right? Help people think about, well, these are the kind of questions they might ask, and this is what they mean by that, right? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, I know what a person might mean by asking that question, but that's not the words that they're using, right? So helping people interpret those kind of things and be ready to answer questions. Um, and talk about themselves or ways that you might be able to help with this as well. And then thinking about what kind of on the job or long term supports are going to be helpful. If you've known somebody for 3, 4, 5 years, what have you seen be really helpful for them so that that can be applied to the job site as well? Right? Like I know that when Joe comes in, I dim the lights because bright lights are really hard, right? And he can just focus and do more when the lights are dimmer. All right, well, then let's find a job where we can dim the lights or take out the fluorescent bulbs or be in a separate workspace or something, or a place where it's just not so bright all the time. Are noise canceling headphones helpful for someone to be able to ignore all of the other stimuli and activity that's around and focus on the task at hand? Some of these things you're aware of already and can help share that information that can be applied at work. And then thinking about on the job overtime as well. So what's different about supported employment than other employment services is this idea of extended services, that the support, it might fade right over time. The employment specialist, the job coach, isn't there with them on the job all of the time. This isn't just, it's not a para educator. This is different. It's helping someone be independent and stable at work, but they don't just drop away completely because someone has a more significant impact of disability. We want to check in and make sure things are going well. Do they want to learn more tasks? And so we need to help with that learning. Are some of those supports that were there different? Did management change? Is the supervisor different? And they don't know about some of the arrangements or understand why they're needed, and we can come back in and help with that. Maybe someone wants a different job, and that's okay. People switch job. Most people switch jobs in their life, and sometimes we might get on social media and see the gazillion and 10 likes somebody got because they've worked at McDonald's for 55 years. Well, how many people stay in the same job for 55 years, especially in an entry-level service job, right? Most people want to do something more and take on other opportunities because we learn more, and so we're able to do more, and we want to make sure that happens for people too. So you might see them through some other type of therapy or service still and realize that's really cool that you have this job and I'm glad you like it, but what else do you want to do? Right? You're 23 now, you're 24 now. Well, it's okay to ask for another job or a different job. And I've talked to people who care about someone who receives supported employment, whether it's another service provider or a family member who's like, "What? I'm just so happy to see he has something. I didn't know we could ask for something better." It's always okay to ask for something better and help people have better lives as they go along, right? So making sure that we feel comfortable and helping people advocate for themselves throughout as well is important. I am looking at a question in the chat box. So the answer is yes. Is it super easy to get and prevalent and accessed everywhere? The reality is probably no. But the question is, are there services or programs that can help teens and autism spectrum disorder in driving and practice driving? So I mentioned vocational rehabilitation. One of the They offer a wide variety of services and supports to help somebody become employed. One of the things that helps somebody become employed is being able to physically get to work. And a really common way that happens in our state is to drive there. And so, yes, vocational rehabilitation can help people learn to drive. And I know they get more and more referrals of young people on the spectrum who need driving instruction in a different way. And so they have some driving specialists that can provide that instruction, and sometimes they contract with local driving schools. There are some driving simulators. They're trying to, there's, as I understand, there's different types of driving simulators that have different types of effectiveness for folks on the autism spectrum. And so figuring out the right one and if it's going to be effective, but VR can be a way to do that. Yes. I have someone just in my own life from my own family friend connections who was a young person on the autism spectrum who was in college, but in order to get to work once she finished, she was going to need to be able to drive because she lives in a rural area and would have access to a car, but being able to drive was going to be the easiest way for her to get to work and make the most sense. And so she applied for VR services for that reason. And as someone who knows her, we were able to talk about, this is how you get an appointment. These are the kind of things they're going to ask. This is the kind of information they need. So you could be that person to help somebody through that application and eligibility process, and just let them know they can help you learn to drive. Long answer to that question, but it's a good question. And on that note, if there are other questions, I'm happy to field those as well. We are almost at our time, but if you do have questions, please feel free to ask. My email address is on the slide because what I do is talk about employment and help people access supports and understand the system. And so I am happy to field questions down the road as well.
Thank you, Katie, for that.